Well, welcome back, everybody. My name is Devin. I'm still an alcoholic, um, and I'm really happy to be here. And we did have a week off, so I will just, and we might have some newer faces here. So I'm just going to take a brief moment to just kind of recap. Um, really quick, I do have a sobriety date. It's August 28th of 2011. I have a home group in Brooklyn, New York, which is called No Serenity Till Brooklyn. Um, and that's been my home group for almost probably like 10 and a half years at this point. I'm a big believer in home group. I'm a big believer that the unity side of our triangle and what we're kind of here to talk about with these traditions. Um, and in general, my participation in Alcoholics Anonymous stems from my home group. Um, and so these traditions are all about how we would stay in right relationships with each other. That's really where this came out of, was that Alcoholics Anonymous was falling apart. And I would encourage anybody, if you're here and you're sober, to ask yourself, like, how does all this exist? And I imagine it's probably still pretty fresh in your town, where you could probably trace the roots back to the beginning of AA in your town, and be able to see, like, how did this start? And usually where it starts is like one person gets sober, and then they start trying to carry a message of hope and recovery through living the 12th step and practicing the first 11 steps in their daily life. And they try to go out and they find another drunk to try to help them get sober. And that's how AA started, and that's our history. And if you're here, I encourage everybody to go read the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. Go find, Alcoholics Anonymous puts books out called Comes of Age, Pass It On, Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, and the ones over here. There's some non-conference approved, like people that are AA members or historians that went in and did a bunch of research and went through the archives and just tried to put this story together. Because the thing that I think gets lost sometimes when we start getting into, the relationships and this becomes everyday life, is that in the history of humankind, for as long as we've been here, and as long as we've crushed grapes, so to speak, and had alcohol, it's been about 90 years in the totality of human existence that we've actually had a solution for the problem of alcoholism. And we're somehow born and existing in this little sliver of time where there's actually a solution for the alcoholic. And for me, I got excited about the idea of, well, how does that happen and how do we end up here? And the traditions came out because we were destroying ourselves, for lack of a better word. I came in here and I started working a program, and I learned from my own experience, from our literature, and from other members of Alcoholics Anonymous, that my real problem is I'm a selfish and self-centered and self-obsessed person. And that my real problem was never the drinking. That my real problem is that the seeds of my discontent and my restlessness and my irritability with all of you lies within me and within my heart. Really within my mind. I think my heart doesn't contain that, but in my mind, I have all these protestations about you, and I want to push you away. And that's because I'm an extremely self-centered and self-obsessed person. And the problem is I just can't see that on a regular basis. I don't clock that. And so working the 12 steps opened my eyes to that. And then I got really excited once I really had this aha moment on the other side of a fifth step. And I started to get really interested in what was all this other service stuff going on? What were these letters? And so I started to get involved, and that's where I started to take a real look at our history. And so we talked a little bit about, we talked a lot the last 4 sessions about the underpinnings of this entire journey of the 12 traditions is unity. Just like in our first step, powerlessness is the underpinning of all the steps. Why would I write this inventory? Well, I'm going to write the inventory because I can see that if I continue living life as I'm living, then I don't have any power. It's going to kill me. So, okay, I'll make a decision to seek God, whatever that is, and I'll write an inventory. Why am I going to make these amends and go to these people where I stole from them and ripped them off and yelled at them and all these things? Why am I going to go make amends for that? Well, because if I don't, I'm going to drink again. And if I drink again, I'm going to die. So I get good motivation. Um, and so all these traditions, they kind of wrap up into unity. Why would I consider letting go of my own personal ambitions here if the group doesn't want to do that? Because that's how God shows up, is we have a group conscience. And that's our second tradition starts to lay the foundation. How do I keep a group together is that I listen to everybody and I get everybody involved and we make sure that everybody has a voice. And we try to have an open mind and an open heart and really listen and consider the viewpoints of everybody who's involved in this group. So that's how I would be able to have some unity showing up in a second tradition, is I don't become the guy who's the stick in the mud who tells everybody they're doing it wrong and has to, constantly beat people up. And I've been that guy and I can still be that guy. Because I have issues with how my home group does things. And I think anyone, if you've been a member of a home group for 10 and a half years and you don't take issue every once in a while with what's going on at the home group, I start to wonder if you're alcoholic. I think it's just by nature of some of this stuff, our humanness shows up. But I defer to my group's conscience, right? I was at an area committee meeting last night and I wasn't aware that I needed to be there and cast vote for my county. I'm an alternate, and I assumed that my primary was going to be there. And they wanted to make some quick motion. There was very little discussion, and they wanted to send money to our general service office, and I say no. There's 37 people said yes, and 2 of us said no. You know what I mean? And that's fine. I'll say no. I'm not going to go around and argue with everybody in my area that we're making a bad choice to send $5,000 down the service structure, though. And to me, that's respecting our group conscience and trying to keep unity with my area. They made a vote. We had a discussion. I don't agree. That's fine. We talked about there's no membership requirements. We don't want to keep anybody out of AA. Most of us come in and we're not excited to be new members of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not I finally made it to this exclusive club that I've been trying to get to, Alcoholics Anonymous. When we come in here and it's like, I hate everybody. I hate you. I want to kill myself. Leave me alone. I'm dying. I maybe need some help, but I don't want to talk to you people about it. I'm not going to call you. I don't want to go to the coffee shop or the diner. That's where I came in at. And we say, hey, that's great. You don't have to do any of that stuff. You can just come and be a member. Just come and hang out. You're always welcome back. And if you mean business, we're never going to kick you out. And so we have this openness to, if you want to be a member, be a member. And that's, comes down to what we spoke about. Who am I to decide who gets to recover? Who am I to decide who has alcoholism? I'm not God, so I don't have a right to get in there and decide for you whether you belong. No, I just would find it silly if you're a non-alcoholic and you're just hanging out in AA. I find that silly, but it happens. But I don't have the right to kick you out because I'm just a member and I'm not an authority. And that's something I think that's useful just to quote again. This is what we're talking about here is you guys can jump in and ask questions and cut me off at any moment. This is not meant to be a monologue. And B, as a member, I'm not an authority. The authority here is God. But I have experience of 14 years and change of being sober and doing a decent bit of service outside of the home group and all kinds of other stuff and a decent bit of experience in sponsorship and being sponsored. And so anything that I say is really, when we get in the traditions, a lot of it is from each one of our own perspective. And so this is kind of how this stuff makes sense to me. And if you see it differently, that's great. I'm not here to convince anybody that I'm right and they're wrong, or to do anything other than maybe get someone to open up a little bit and consider some of these principles and see if maybe there's a use case in your personal lives, in your homes, in your own AA groups, and that kind of stuff. So we talked then last session about autonomy. And the thing about autonomy is autonomy is just a word that means self-governing. We all have the freedom to make choices in this world. I could literally it's raining outside. I could choose to go outside in the freezing rain and go, stab somebody or do some violent thing in my neighborhood. And it's New York City, and like that stuff kind of happens. And guess what? I'll probably end up arrested, and I'll end up probably in jail, and I'll have to pay the consequences of those actions, right? That's like the legal worldview of society. If I break your law, you're going to come and I'm going to be held to account. And I think our fourth tradition opens the door for the spiritual accountability between me and God and me and the rest of the world. That I have the ability to go and do whatever I want to do. I can, I was talking to Karthik about this just the other day, that we have the ability to go out and do and live in certain ways. And we can, I was a really dark, sarcastic, like I use these things and how I approached and hung out with people. And there was a moment where I realized that had an impact on the people around me that I didn't like. And it wasn't because somebody came to me and said that's wrong. It was because I started going, I don't like that I'm kind of saying these things. And there's some part of me that feels like it's wrong, but I can't seem to stop doing it. And where I started to get with that was I started to look at how do my actions and how do the ways that I treat people impact them? Do I see that it impacts them? And that was like a whole new experience of understanding that, like, yeah, I have the freedom to go and do whatever and be self-governing. But if my actions are actually negatively impacting the world around me and I'm causing harm, the writing is really clear in the literature that we have. In the book Alcoholics Anonymous, over and over again, it says if your conduct is out there hurting people, you're going to get drunk. If you're walking around not living on a spiritual basis, you're going to get drunk. And these traditions open the door for me to have a bunch more principles to consider of what does it really look like to live a spiritual life. And today, I try my best to put a little bit of a governor on myself. I don't need to be going, 1,000 miles an hour here. I don't want to be running around crashing into the world around me. If anything, I'd like to be out here loving everybody. And I'd like to bring everybody that gets to be around me, I'd like to bring them up rather than bring them down. And that's not because somebody instilled that idea into me. It's just in my heart over a year, years of practicing and prayer, meditation, and inventory and sponsorship and doing this program. It became a point where I want to actually try to imprint the world in a positive way. And I think that really brings us into this fifth tradition, which I think, because we're talking about these kind of one at a time, or maybe a few at a time as we go. The fifth tradition I also see is directly related to our unity and to our 12th step and everything that we're doing here. And the fifth tradition is where we get what people would call singleness of purpose or primary purpose. And I'm going to read the short form and then I'll read the long form. The short form says, each group has but one primary purpose: to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. And then the long form is also very short. It says each Alcoholics Anonymous group ought to be a spiritual entity having but one primary purpose, that of carrying its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. And then I'm going to remind everybody of the 12th step. The 12th step says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. And I think we talked about it in the first session, which is, how do I look for what is, unity in AA? And I think I don't hear a lot of people talk about it, but to me, how do I foster unity within AA? Number one is I live the 12 steps as a way of life. That is my blueprint for how to try to live. It's been evolving recently. And as far as the 11th step practice, 10 and 11 has taken on a little bit of a different light, where I've really been just trying to be living in a place of active prayer. And like less formalized, I have to sit at a certain moment and do a certain thing and be there and have this formal stuff going on. And more like, as I'm living in the world, I'm trying to have in my mind, or in my heart really, in the background, an attitude of continuous prayer. That wherever I am, I'm trying to bring God to the table. I'm trying to bring that awareness. And I'm trying to walk through the world pausing on a regular basis and really having um, this idea that wherever I am, God is, start to kind of creep in a little brighter. And that's been super cool. But if I'm not actually clear on our literature, and I'm not clear on how we do the steps, and I don't know how to help somebody to do that, how am I supposed to ever be in unity with this fellowship at large? That's just my own personal opinion. But I believe that's our purpose. You know, when I came to AA, I had no purpose, it seemed like. I mean, I thought I was supposed to play music for a living. It appears, based on what has transpired in my life, that that was somewhat accurate. That that's part of what I'm supposed to do here, is to serve people um, through performing and playing music, at least for right now at this moment in my life. But when I came to AA suicidal and not knowing how to live, you guys gave me a purpose. You said your purpose now is to go bear witness of God's power, God's love, and God's way of life if you actually do this program and your life changes. And that was in the third step, when I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood him. That third step prayer clearly has the last line: take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness of your power, your love, and your way of life. May I do thy will always. And so I believe that's the whole purpose of Alcoholics Anonymous, is to go forward and to be the lived demonstration of God's power, God's love, and God's way of life, and be able to be the demonstration of what this amazing program can do to the life, you know, to our lives, and how we can be changed and transformed. You know, that's what this program ultimately is about. It's not about sobriety. Sobriety obviously is why I showed up. I couldn't get sober. But then I was promised freedom and a new way of living and a new happiness. And I was promised that I would find a life that would, I'd be given or shown how to live a life that makes sense to me. And those were big promises. But from where I sit today, all that stuff has been true. And not one of these AA members that told me all this stuff was going to happen ever seemed to lie to me. And all I did was I tried to live this 12-step program and go help others. And so primary purpose goes into a few different ways, right? The first sentence of the essay says, you know, it's a quote called, of old time quote called, "Shoemaker, stick to thy last." And what he says is, it's better to do one thing supremely well than many badly. Over here, a lot of our scripts and meetings say, you know, we ask that you focus on our singleness of purpose and keep your shares focused to the problems of alcohol. Later on, we have a tradition that says AA has no opinion on outside issues. And you're going to see how clearly that, in this primary purpose and outside issues, that's basically saying the same thing. And what we talk about with primary purpose is, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous has one purpose: to help an alcoholic recover from alcoholism. We don't get involved in anything else. We're not here for drug addicts. We're not here for overeaters. We're not here for gamblers. We're not here for the people with the money problems. What Alcoholics Anonymous did, though, is we shared our program. And we said, this 12-step program, we did not have a trademark on it. You know, this is for everybody. You know, we stumbled upon this approach to living that seems to work on all sorts of obsessive compulsive kind of behaviors that are detrimental. But if we start allowing everybody under one tent and call it, it's all the same problem, then we can start to diversify the message. And that can be, I think, what he's talking about here. It's better to do one thing really well than a bunch of things kind of okay. And I'll pause really quick because we have a hand. Go ahead, Karan.
Yeah. So my question is related to the singleness of purpose. When we say, let's stick to our problem with alcoholism and what we are sharing. Uh, I mean, my troubles with alcohol. Sorry, am I audible now? Sorry. Yeah. So when my troubles with alcohol can be very easily defined, but my troubles with alcoholism as a whole, I've run into a lot of things. It can be mental issues. It can be the way I transact with people. It can be my other addictions that stem out of from my core addictions, right? So where do we draw the line? And from your experience, did you deal with any of that?
Well, and Thank you for the question. I would say that is the singleness of purpose question. It's like, where's the line here? And so let me just paint this picture, and this is how it's made sense to me. In a meeting, I was invited to sit there and consider, what if this was my first ever AA meeting? What if I was a brand newcomer? I've never been to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm sitting in the meeting. What am I going to hear? And so I have, I'm not a specialist. I get, I have a mind that goes nuts, and I can find ways to be obsessed about, we were talking about coffee earlier. I mean, Karan asked me a question about what coffee I was drinking, and I had no idea how big of a question he just asked, because I've been nerding out and like obsessing over how to make coffee for 12 years at home, right? Since I got sober. Um, but if I'm new, I've met people that were just alcoholics, meaning I mean I had a guy that had a grand mal seizure at my home group because he tried to cold turkey, and he was drinking about almost a handle of vodka a day. And when they stood up to say the Serenity prayer, and that guy conked out and had a seizure on the spot, fractured his shoulder, ended up in the ICU for a couple of days and in the hospital for like almost 2 weeks. That guy had never smoked weed. He had never done drugs. He had a job as a video editor and was working from home and was able to make a living and just kind of hole himself up and be insanely drunk the clock around for years on end. And so a lot of the singleness of purpose stuff, in my opinion, at a meeting is mostly about, what if that guy showed up to AA at his first ever meeting, and we're talking about, IV drug use and smoking rocks and all the stuff that has to happen in order to do the other parts that a lot of our alcoholism would take us. It's like, I got a lot of that in my story. I was the 18-year-old kid who was an IV drug user. But my alcoholism is really characterized by my funny relationship to alcohol. Like, that's how I get in as an alcoholic. I have a physical allergy to alcohol that once it goes into my body, I have to drink more. I don't have the ability to stop or moderate my alcohol use. Now, that always led me to all sorts of other stuff. But what became abundantly clear at the end for me was that I have a physical allergy to alcohol. And more importantly, I have a mind that when I finally got to a place in my life where I said I need to get sober, I could not drink. And so I have alcoholism because I can see very clearly I have a mind that can't leave alcohol alone. I have no power there. Oh, we're getting a thumbs up. I have no power mentally to stay away from a drink. Every time I made a decision to quit, I started again. And more importantly, physically, every time alcohol goes into my body at the end, I had no way to moderate that in any way. And so if you read our literature, you see that Bill Wilson was also doing drugs. Bill Wilson was getting prescribed opiates and was drinking his gin and on the painkillers and going nuts. You see that Dr. Bob for years. I mean, it's literally the way Dr. Bob's story is written, by the way, I find amazing. He like paints this really grim picture of like how he's drinking and prescribing himself his own painkillers, and then goes, this was to go on for like the next 16 years or 10 years. Or like, it's like one little sentence gives you this timeline of like over a decade in his life of living like this. And so we see that like our founders of this program were not purely just drinking. But what was suggested to me was, what kind of a disservice would you ever do to a newcomer or to an alcoholic if they showed up at their first ever AA meeting and they felt like they didn't belong because they hadn't done drugs? And so to me, what I think about as far as how to talk about in a meeting format, and again, this is just like in a meeting, I don't bring all the other stuff to the table as far as like substance abuse. It doesn't matter that at 18 years old, I was shooting heroin. That's not a part of the story that matters in my AA meeting. I can mention it and people, will know that hey, I have a problem with all kinds of stuff. And I can have problems with money and credit. And I've had a lot of fun. But the main thing that I have to come here for is that I'm an alcoholic. And if I don't take care of this thing, I will take a drink. And if I take a drink, all bets are off if any of those other things, everything's going to come back. So I've seen it. But if there's somebody here who doesn't have those problems and it's just drank, I don't want to be a reason that they have that feeling. Because, think about when you're new. Here's a question. When you were new, weren't you, I mean, if you're like me, weren't you looking for a way out? Oh, I'm not like those people. I don't need to do AA. That's for the crazy people. And so if I'm giving somebody a way out by suggesting that alcoholism is more than just a funny relationship to alcohol, or that like that's that like you as you get here you understand it's a human problem, it's a self problem. And I think that's what you're talking about, is this is about me being a completely self-obsessed human being, and how that opens up the more I start to really dig around, the more I wake up, the more inventory I do, the more I start to see myself, then I start to realize how deep this thing really goes. But when you're brand new, those ideas are like too much to handle. But if you got a funny relationship to alcohol and you showed up because you don't know how to stop drinking, welcome. I want to make sure that you feel like you belong. And I don't want to make you feel like in order to be an alcoholic, you got to be an alcoholic and have smoked a bunch of crack or gone and done a bunch of ketamine or, have $50,000 in the debt and a 200 credit score or whatever. Like those aren't requirements for membership here. You might have all those things going on, but my alcoholism is really characterized, I believe, by my funny relationship to alcohol. And but I think back to our third, we don't have a membership requirement here. So it's not about you have to have, it's like you can be here and not know. If you have a desire not to drink, you can call yourself a member and you can hang out. And there was a great speaker back in the day named Scott Redman. And Scott used to say, if you're new here, I want to welcome all the dope Goliaths and crack monsters and meth heads. I mean, he would welcome all these people that thought they were drug addicts and all this stuff. And he goes, I really just hope you can catch alcoholism. And alcoholism is an infection that spreads through the ear. And it usually is from one alcoholic sharing honestly their story. And if you're able to relate and see that you might have this funny relationship to alcohol, you can catch alcoholism in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the great news is there's a solution to alcoholism. And so he kind of painted that picture of like the openness that we have here. But for me, so this is a long-winded answer, but I think this is really the core of what we're doing here in this fifth tradition is I don't want anybody that just drank to ever feel like they don't belong. And so I personally try to respect this primary purpose by not talking about all the other stuff that I don't think has much of a bearing on whether I'm alcoholic or not. But I don't shy away from letting people know, like, this is a part of my story. I was an 8-year-old kid that was prescribed methamphetamine because I had to get evaluated. I was a 17-year-old kid that started putting powder up my nose, and by 18, I was shoving needles in my arms. That doesn't make me alcoholic, but it shows that I have a pretty funny 0 to 1,000 kind of mentality here. And the reality is, when that got applied to alcohol, um, I had a crazy ride with alcohol. And so if you're here and you've got all these other things, that's great. I talk about all that stuff in sponsorship and outside of the meetings, and everyone who knows me knows that, I have all these other parts of my story with that. But when I'm in an Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm going to keep it strictly just to my relationship with alcohol because I don't know who else is in the room. I think that's the humility that I'm asked to hold on to. And the main thing is I want to make sure that Alcoholics Anonymous is here, that you guys might have children one day, and those children might have children. And somewhere down this line, there's going to be more alcoholics. And if Alcoholics Anonymous diversifies and tries to put on the bleeding heart and say, we can help everybody, then our meetings devolve into something that doesn't have any focus. And this is where what we'll see in the next tradition, the subtext of the sixth tradition, is we don't affiliate, we cooperate. And so one of the great things a home group could do around primary purpose is to find out if there's other fellowships in your area. Is there an NA group that's solid? Is there a Cocaine Anonymous group? Is there Al-Anon? Is there any other resources? And this is really the big problem that we see, at least over here in the US and Canada. And especially now, it's crazy now, post 2020 pandemic lockdown stuff. A lot of these fellowships didn't really make it back to in person. some of the smaller, like newer fellowships like Cocaine Anonymous, even Narcotics Anonymous, has struggled to get back online with a physical meeting presence in even New York City. I mean, which is crazy because New York City has like 1,500 registered Alcoholics Anonymous groups just in the city alone. And now there's maybe like four meetings for Cocaine Anonymous that exist all the way, including Long Island and Manhattan and all the five boroughs. And there's a lot of cats that I meet today that go, I mean, I did drink, but recently it's been crack and hookers. And I'm like, well, cool, man. If you've been, mainly blowing a bunch of money on crack cocaine and sex workers, then perhaps, going to a fellowship where you can openly talk about that. And that's really going to be the primary purpose of that fellowship would be really useful. And the problem is if we don't have strong other fellowships like Narcotics Anonymous or Cocaine Anonymous or Heroin Anonymous or, if we don't have other fellowships around, then where do we send these people? And by no means is our fifth tradition saying to kick people to the curb and don't try to offer them help. But I think the main part about primary purpose for me at a home group level is non-alcoholics should not ever share at an AA meeting. Now, this might be considered controversial and it may not be possible. But as far as I'm concerned, and as far as the people that have helped me and taught me all this, the moment a non-alcoholic speaks at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, it is no longer a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Non-alcoholics can attend open meetings, but to keep our primary purpose going, only alcoholics participate. Meaning, if I'm sharing from the floor, I better be an alcoholic. My home group has all open meetings for a reason. We want family members, we want med students, we want people with an interest in Alcoholics Anonymous to be able to come. We feel as a group that that's part of us carrying our group's message, letting people know that you can recover, that there is a solution to alcoholism, that you don't have to suffer because you have this funny relationship to alcohol, that you can actually go out and become happily and usefully whole, and you can be free of that. And so we want family members and we want people to come in and support. We want people to come. We want Al Anon members. But inevitably, you're going to run into a bunch of people either get bussed in from a treatment center and you've got a mixed bag of a bunch of drug addicts and a bunch of alcoholics and everyone's confused. Um, and that's unavoidable to some extent these days. I would never cut somebody off. There's a group in my area, though, that if you raise your hand and you said, I'm Devin, I'm an addict, before you could start talking, the chairperson will cut you off and say, do you have a desire not to drink? Or are you alcoholic or do you have a desire not to drink? And they will literally like stop somebody who introduces themselves as an addict publicly before they talk. Now, how does that group come to that decision? Well, that group came to that decision because they're autonomous and they had a group conscience. And so the one thing I'll point out about the tradition, the way it's written, it says each group has one primary purpose to carry its message. So, like, and in the third tradition, it says any two or three alcoholics gathered together for the explicit purpose of sobriety with no other affiliation can call themselves an AA group. So, as a group, we hear what's our primary purpose? It's like, have we ever in our AA groups, have we ever had that discussion at a business meeting? Hey, what's our primary purpose? What do we think? Because the group gets to come to its own group conscience about what the primary purpose is. You'll see some groups, their primary purpose is to carry a message that come to this group every single day. It's 7 days a week. Be at this group every day, and you should be able to stay sober. Some groups carry the message of the power of God is the only way that you will be able to recover. So you better work this 12 steps because your life depends on it, and then go help others. My group's more in line with that. And then there's people that have all sorts of different messages, and all of them are fine because it comes out of the home group. And there's a group of members that show up that had a discussion about what kind of a meeting do we want to have and what's our group's message. But if we diversify, if we said, you know what, you can be about a drug addict, come on in. You have a problem with overeating, join the group. It's fine. We need to help you. it comes down, I think, finally to this piece. And there's a great, like, 7-minute talk that Bill Wilson gave that I can try to share with everybody if you're interested. But he talks about this dilemma that we'll have someone, as he calls them back in the day, the narcotic. He goes, we'll have someone who's a narcotic brought into our meeting, and somebody will want to be able to make him a full-fledged member. And thus the problem arises. Um, and the question is, what's the problem? I was talking to my buddy Bart when he was sponsoring me, and we were in the middle of this, and I said something about AA this or AA that, and was making some blanket statement about this is AA and this is whatever, and he goes, well, what is AA? You ever had somebody ask you that question? What is Alcoholics Anonymous? And I started to respond with, well, it's the meetings and it's all this stuff. And he said, no. He said, Alcoholics Anonymous is one drunk talking to another. This whole program came out of, and this goes back to our history, this whole program came out of one guy telling his story of his brokenness and his funny relationship to alcohol to another guy who shared that same kind of funny relationship to alcohol. And those two human hearts found each other in identification. And the real magic that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous is it's one alcoholic talking to another. That's what the meetings, the service work, everything that we do, in my opinion, in AA is designed to find us in places like this where it's one drunk talking to another, or one, in some cases like this, one drunk talking to a few. But that's Alcoholics Anonymous. That is the magic. That's the piece that we've always needed, that I'm not here to give you instructions on how to live your life. I'm just here to share how I've been living my life. And if you want to make use of what I have to offer, the only way I've ever had that feeling is because I resonated with the people in front of me. I listened to the stories of what people shared with me, and I go, this guy gets me. He understands me. He understands the pain I feel. He's lived it, or she's lived it. And then I became open-minded to take a look at what it was that they had done and how they were living, because those people looked like they were different and they had been changed. And so if I'm not an alcoholic, how can I have that identification? If I mainly just did a bunch of drugs, how do I go and share from the podium and talk about being powerless over alcohol if I don't really have clear experience on that? And so I think that's ultimately what this kind of boils down to, is just making sure I respect the house I'm in, I understand where I'm at, and I make sure that, if I'm going to get up and talk at a meeting, I better have drinking stories. Because if there's a guy who just drank a bunch of alcohol, drank a bunch of whiskey for 20 years, and I get up and he doesn't relate to me at all, he's not going to listen to me, because I'm not going to listen to people that I don't relate to. And that's where it came to me. I've done a ton of these things where you show up in a workshop like this and it's on traditions or history or service, and I'll sit there for 30 minutes and I'll realize that I'm struggling to pay attention. And whenever I realize I'm struggling to pay attention, what didn't happen is that guy never took a drink. He came in and started talking, or she came in and started talking about service below the group level or traditions or concepts or whatever. And I never heard that they took a drink. And when I don't realize, when I don't get a picture of what they were like before they got sober, I struggle to focus. And that's just maybe my own thing. But I need that identification. I need to know that, like, I'm hearing from a drunk. Because if I'm hearing from a drunk, I will listen. But if I think that this is just, oh, this could be a doctor just trying to tell me something, I'm out, dude. I'm out. But so the idea here is, let me turn this light on. Let me read a few things. Just as firmly bound by obligation are the members of Alcoholics Anonymous, who have demonstrated that they can help problem drinkers as others seldom can. The unique ability of each AA to identify himself with and bring recovery to the newcomer in no way depends on his learning, eloquence, or on any special individual skills. The only thing that matters is that he is an alcoholic who has found a key to sobriety. These legacies of suffering and recovery are easily passed among alcoholics, one to the other. This is our gift from God, and its bestowal upon others like us is the one aim that today animates AAs all around the globe. To me, that's it. Um, and then the story that they talk about that's in the essay is Bill going to Towns Hospital, and there's an old Irish Catholic drunk, really bad drunk, Irish Catholic. It's a particular bad brand of alcoholism coming from an Irish guy Irish with an Irish Catholic family. Um, and this guy is in the hospital, and Bill's 12 stepping him. And the guy's starting to get on board, and then Bill starts to say, "Hey, it's a spiritual program. And what do you think about God?" And this Irish guy gets really indignant and says, "Oh, this is what this is. You're trying to convert me to your church. I know I've got a church and I got a God. And I don't, and he gets really irate and resentful. And Bill concludes, "Hey, you probably know way more about God than I do, and you probably have a far deeper faith than mine, but no doubt you're better taught in religious matters than I, so I can't tell you anything about religion. I don't even want to try to. I'll bet that you could probably give me a letter perfect definition of humility. But here's the kicker. But from what you've told me about yourself and your problems on how you propose to lick them, I think I know what's wrong." You know, and like the subtext there is, you might know a lot about God. I'm not here to change that, but you're still drunk. And here I am sober. That's the message, right? The message is you can sit across from somebody and they can identify with your drinking, and they're still drunk and you're sober. And the hope is that that will break that icy mountain around somebody's heart enough for them to go, okay, if you really drank like this and you really lived like this, then how do you do that? And so, um, Bill writes, he goes, "Now, suppose I had been obliged to talk to this man on religious grounds. Suppose my answer had been that AA needed a lot of money, that AA went in for education, for hospitals. Suppose I'd suggested that I'd take a hand in his domestic and business affairs. Where would he have wound up? No place, of course." And he goes, "Years later, this tough Irish customer liked to say, my sponsor sold me on one idea, and that was sobriety. At the time, I couldn't have bought anything else." That if that's all we're selling here is sobriety, I think we have a potent message. But if this becomes about a bunch of other stuff and about you have to believe this, or you need to do that, or you should have also had these problems, or this and that, it starts to open the door for more people to find ways to run away. And it starts to open the door for more people to say, yeah, that's good for you. That's not for me. And so for my money, at every meeting I'm ever at, my whole focus is on one thing. It's on recovery from alcoholism. I don't believe that this is group therapy. I think AA is not group therapy. There is an element of group therapy to AA, but at its core, AA is one alcoholic talking to another. And my job seems to be to show up and tell people that I've come here as a broken person, and the only thing I ever did was this 12-step program. And I can tell you most days I am not feeling pretty broken. I'm feeling pretty whole. And this purpose that I was given here through this program to go help other alcoholics and avail myself of trying to live a life of love and service and be useful in my community has revolutionized everything about my life. Our buddy Carr took a 3-year anniversary on Sunday. And he said, I can't understand or describe anything of what's going on in my life. But I know that the only reason I'm living the life today is because I've made my life about trying to help others. And to me, that's it. That if I have another reason for being here other than trying to help people and to be a demonstration of what the power of God can do alive in my heart, then I think I'm doing everybody else a disservice. And I might be pushing people away inadvertently. And so part of my adherence to that fourth tradition and autonomy is I try to be really careful about what I talk about when I'm officially in an AA capacity, meaning I'm at a meeting, I'm at my home group. My primary purpose at my home group is not to go find a partner and go dating. I mean, I'm married today, but it's like I early on it became clear I don't want to date and look for romantic relationships in AA, because now AA becomes this like dating pool, and I'm looking at all these people going, oh, maybe I could take her out, and maybe I could, and now I'm not thinking about recovery. If my primary focus to AA is, it has become my social network, and this is where I hang out with all my friends. How many new people or new faces show up to my group that don't get welcomed in? The guy that needs somebody to go talk to him, well, I'd rather go talk to my friends. It's hard. That's not fun. I mean, that's the talk about being difficult to adhere to. You've been in AA for 5, 6 years, 4 years. You got a lot of friends probably in the meeting, people you don't always see. You know what I want to do is I want to go talk to my friends because I love you and I want to hear what's going on in your life. But then there might be some new quiet person that showed up that like no one knows. And maybe my job, if I'm really being an AA member, is to go and talk to that guy. Maybe my primary purpose here is to go and talk to people and actually be of service. And that means I might have to put aside what I think, needs to happen or what I want to do to make sure that person's welcomed in and go talk to them. Um, that shows up in funny ways where I'm hanging out with a wet drunk who smells bad, who wants me to buy him some food. And all I want to do is kind of run home to my wife. And here I am driving this dude around the corner, smelling my car up probably for the next couple of days because he's sitting on the seat, and spending $10 or whatever to get him some food. And I look around and a bunch of the people in my group are talking to each other and hanging out. And everyone's kind of written off this guy as a lost cause. And that's sad to me. But it just shows that like I was given a job. I'm supposed to go help that guy or try. That guy's a drunk and he just needs some help. So maybe I can go try. And so then let's tease this out a little in our personal lives. What's my primary purpose in my marriage? What's my primary purpose at my job? What's my primary purpose in my family? As a son, as an uncle, as a friend, how many different ways do I have relations with people? How many different group activities do I find myself in? Do I keep those lines pretty clear? I think my primary purpose in my marriage is to show up and be a loving husband and a loving partner, and to have, the conversations that I've had um, with my wife about what she thinks is acceptable behavior, what she's looking for, all that kind of stuff is what has um, created an understanding of how I'm supposed to be acting and what's supposed to be going on. But my primary purpose in my marriage is to show up and, I think, serve the marriage. Go ahead, Karthik. I'm gonna pull this up while I listen.
So my question here is, in marriage, sometimes their request may be a little too much. So the two parts to this. The first part is a request is I may feel that um, I'm being used as a doormat or something like that. What do I do then? Can I come to a common understanding? Uh, So I don't know, like, should I express myself? But maybe I feel that, this request makes me more of a doormat than a partner.
Well, I don't know if there's anything to do per se, because that sounds like an answer. Um, I mean, I think if we're in a marriage, and we're in a long-term relationship, it really comes down to hopefully a two-way street in communication. Um, I'm here to try to be an expression of God's love. So let me just read this because I think this is kind of in line with where my head's at with this stuff. But this is how Mike put this together for looking at this in a marriage. He goes, each marriage or relationship has but one primary purpose: to serve as an expression of God's love. And um, some of the questions he asks. What is our sole purpose in a relationship, and why do we limit ourselves to one purpose? How do you express God's love in your marriage or relationship? Um, how important is compassion, and is it a form of love? How important are understanding and acceptance in expressing God's love to others? Um, I think nowhere in here are we being told to not find unity and some common ground and parity as far as what our roles are in a relationship. But I think that's a big part of it. If I have a primary purpose, if I talk with my wife and she says, look, the primary purpose we have here is, let's think conservative values, right? My job as the wife is I'm going to clean the house and make sure that the food's on the table and take care of all that stuff. Your job is go to work and make the money. It's like, okay, I have a primary purpose. We have some function and we have some, delineation of what the responsibilities are. I'm going to take care of the bills and the money stuff, and you're here to take care of the home in my absence. Now, in today's modern world, that looks totally different. Most couples, both people over here are working, but I think that comes down to like those are discussions. As a group in my marriage, I can get together and we can get some group conscience on what is our role and our function here? What are the lines? If I'm effectively the one who's supposed to be taking care of, repairs around the house and then all sorts of stuff is busted up, well, then I'm not really doing my job. But I want to go and do something else. And now my partner's telling me I got to go fix the light in the room and go, fix that thing that's fallen off over here. The toilet's busted. And if I just don't want to do it, then that's maybe not, um, it's like, well, I was given a role and I'm just actively not doing it. But I think with everything, I just look at what's my purpose here. If my purpose is to be an expression of God's love, am I doing that? Do I think it's about what kind of principles do I value here? I want to be loving and supportive and patient and kind. I want to see that, my wife is a gift in my life. That's not something that I should be, could take, that's not of course I'm going to have a marriage. There's plenty of people that don't have a marriage. Somehow a relationship started and we've been able to build that together, and that's gone on for a good bit. Um, and I think
Yeah.
it's clear because, oh, go ahead. Sorry. I might be getting
So
off
you're
topic here.
saying, all whatever you said is very reasonable. But what I was talking about, something unreasonable. Let me put it another way, maybe. She says, you can't go to meetings. You can only go to one meeting per week. My wife never says that, so don't take it the other way. We have a lovely relationship, but I love her and he loves me, so that's just God's blessing. But I have some sponsors, whose wives kind of, say that, you don't go to a, things like that. So how can, I cannot, like, without A, there's no wife or job or anything. So A should come first. So how do we deal with such a kind of a situation?
So that's an interesting one. And I think that is a good or maybe a better example for me to kind of understand the question. So thank you. And I've dealt with this with a couple of people as well. Um, but the first thing I'll mention is something that my my sponsor brings up a bunch that was brought up to him a bunch, which is just because AA comes first does not mean my family comes second. And it's important to understand that this is, could be used as an escape. Well, I'm just going to AA and I start to just escape my family and put them on the back burner because sobriety's got to come first. And that could become a self-serving kind of a cop-out thing. But the other part of it too is, in a sense, it's like some public information work. You know, my buddy had moved and he had a kind of a tenuous relationship around some of the stuff. They were living in a new state in New Jersey and less connected, less plugged in because they had just moved to a new community. It was in the middle of the lockdown and the pandemic, so there was a like don't really know where the groups are, don't really have a home group necessarily. There's a lot of stuff. There's two young kids, big jobs, lots to do. And early on in sobriety, my buddy had been a part of a group that basically said you have to go to a meeting every day while you're new. In order for you to stay sober, you need to be at a meeting every single day. And so for the first like 2 or 3 years of his sobriety, he was just, I got to go to a meeting every day. That's what they told me. And I'm staying sober. So he just did that. And that caused a lot of strife at home. And then his wife kind of was not looking at AA too kindly. She's going, look, we got a daughter. We got this big life going on. I need you at home helping out. And you're just running away to AA every night at 7 o'clock. And so there was that whole piece, which is kind of like, hey, no, you don't go to AA. I need you here. And there was this, at that point, the guy's 8 or 9 years sober, 7 years sober, moved states, but his partner was kind of feeling like, don't go to AA. I need you at home. And some of what we had to talk about was, in a sense, it is just some education. It's not about, I don't want to be at home. It's about, in order for me to be a better husband and a better father, me being sober is important. And I think it ultimately comes down to the need to have a real conversation and get a group conscience. What I would say in a situation like that is you're looking at what feels like a lack of unity. You got two parties that have drastically different views about what needs to happen. And so if I look backwards into this, well, I need to find some unity here. How do I find unity? Well, we got to talk about it. I'm a believer that, depending on where you're at in sobriety, being at meetings is important. Well, it's always important. Like today I have a home group and my home group has 4 meetings a week. I can be to 2 of those. And then I have something like this, usually at least once a week where we're doing some kind of a, outgoing commitment to a workshop like this or a meeting somewhere else. And then I've got calls with sponsees literally every single day. So I'm tethered to recovery and I'm tethered to the fellowship, but it doesn't look like I'm at 7 or 14 meetings a day, which is like what it was when I was brand new. And so I think some of that is a discussion to have in a loving way with our partners. Hey, like me sober is good, right? So me sober, there's some requirements to my sobriety, which are that I need to be a member of this fellowship and I need to show up and try to help some other people. And we have a chapter called Two Wives in the Family Afterward that can be really useful. Also, we have a whole fellowship called Al-Anon, the Al-Anon family groups. And if we've got a partner that's just saying, you have to do this and F that and trying to control you, that's starting to look a lot like untreated Al-Anon. Now, that's not, as Mike, whose, wife is an Al-Anon, will like to remind me, no Al-Anon who's been wounded by the alcoholic and kind of made sick by the alcoholic wants to be, have the alcoholic try to go tell them how to get well. You've done enough, bud. Why don't you go stay in your lane? Right. So it's a delicate subject, but I think it comes down to trying to find that balance and find out,
So,
is there a morning meeting? Can I go to a morning? Maybe I need to start a meeting or have an informal gathering at my house that will on one day that would be acceptable. It's like, how can this work? If it's something like the meeting and somebody kind of what I would say putting an unreasonable request and saying you can't do this.
okay. So let's have follow-up question. Let's say the person tried everything, tried to send it to Al, tried to get unity. Nothing is working out. So could he consider parting ways?
Well, that's only something between them and God and them and their other part, the partner. I mean, certainly in today's society, separating and getting divorced or annulling a marriage has become much more commonplace. I think for my money that's feels like a very serious kind of last minute resort of it, exhausting all of their options. It's like, have we gone to couples therapy? Have we done everything we can? Have we actually, and perhaps if this was a relationship that started drunk, it's not necessarily a relationship that will continue sober. Sometimes people are hurt too much. Um, but that's a between, that's a between you and God and between you and the person. I can, that, and this is, interesting you brought that up because that was suggested of my buddy that I was talking about. He had a guy in AA that went to his sponsor and they came back and said, dude, you're 10th stepping your wife a whole bunch. And we've come to the conclusion that if you don't take action to get divorced here or like to end this marriage, that you're unsponsorable and you're not taking our suggestions. That guy's got has a larger family at this point, is still married. Um, and it's been a joy to watch. And we still have a lot of stuff going on at home that we discuss because that's reality and that's family. Um, but that's way outside the scope of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? I don't have the ability to make any kind of qualifications on your relationship. And it comes simply down to I'm not God and I can't play God in my life, so I can't play God in yours. But certainly if you're in a position that feels untenable and you're being pushed into a corner, we have tools. I'm resentful at my wife. She keeps telling me all these things. She doesn't seem to respect me. Well, write that inventory. I'm afraid of XYZ. Write that inventory. Get quiet. Get in some prayer and meditation. Get with God. Share what you're thinking about with some other people and follow the inspiration you're getting given because that's the journey that we're all on. But yeah, I
Thank
would
you.
say, yeah. So, and I think, my primary purpose in my marriage, hopefully, is to serve my partner and to be an expression of God's love. And that doesn't mean that every relationship is going to work, you know. Um, but I think for me, that's a really good framework, if you will, of how to put this um, through a lens and take a look at what's going on. Are my actions here, does how I show up in my marriage look like an expression of God's love? Or does it look like an expression of self-will? And when I go to work, is my primary purpose at work to work at work, or is my primary purpose to hang out, talk shop with other people, do as little work as possible? Am I applying myself? Am I showing up and actually trying to adhere to this one thing? Do I see the validity and the potency if I just make what I'm doing about one thing? I go to this show and I play this show 7, 8 times a week right now. My job is to show up and play the show the best I can, and as I see it, to make everybody else's job easier, to be a good vibe, to be a positive influence on the workforce, and to show up and just do my job and keep it rolling. And that has opened up an entire door to having a career that is far beyond what I could have ever put together. Go ahead, Karan.
Yeah, Devin. So my question is very specific to romantic relationships. Through my addiction, I've seen that I become very selfish, I become very manipulative. And in my recovery, whenever I tried getting into a relationship, I always had mixed motives. Either I wanted to get laid, and the ulterior motive was maybe I can find that girl and maybe we can lead a happy together life. But whenever I started dating her or courting her, I used to slowly try to build towards a healthy relationship, but the selfishness just comes in. And, you know, I start, the old tendencies come back. And I've had many relationships where I was not able to get rid of this selfish nature of mine. And I was hurting her and myself because I wasn't feeling good about what I was doing. And at the end, it always ended up being a really toxic relationship towards the end. And because we are just using each other for our carnal purposes, and we totally squeeze the beauty out of a relationship. And very recently, from one experience that I've had, I see that I had, I could see these things, and on top of that, there are a lot of fears which stop me from, going and giving it a try again. And some excuses that I use to stop to not date are, maybe I'm not financially settled, all these other reasons that my family is very conservative, and all these are the reasons to just stop myself from going and doing it. And one major fear is, what if I go and be the same old cousin that I was, which was hurting people? So this is something which is a huge block in my life. And the years are running, so I just wanted to.
Thanks for sharing. You know, Mike refers a lot to what I think is page 52 in a 12 and 12. I just read it. Is it 52? 53 in my book. But it is from our twisted relations with friends, family, and society at large that many of us have suffered the most. We have been especially stupid and stubborn about them. The primary fact is we fail to recognize, or the primary fact that we fail to recognize is our total inability to form a true partnership with another human being. Our egomania digs two disastrous pitfalls. Either we insist upon dominating the people we know, or we depend upon them far too much. If we lean too heavily on people, they will sooner or later fail us, for they are human too, and cannot possibly meet our incessant demands. In this way, our insecurity grows and festers. When we habitually try to manipulate others to our own willful desires, they revolt and resist us heavily. Then we develop hurt feelings, a sense of persecution, and a desire to retaliate. I think what you described is everyone. That we all struggle to really find ourselves in relationships with each other. And I think that's what this whole basis of these traditions is hopefully about, opening the door. That how do I find myself in right relations with you and with God and with others? And maybe not in that order. How do I find myself in right relationships with God and with you and with others, or with God, myself, and with others? I think, what you expressed looks a lot like ripe grounds for some inventory. Hey, I have a lot of fears around this. Hey, I have a lot of relationships that go this way. It's like, well, I maybe have resentment at myself or my reality or some old ideas that I have around this stuff as a result of that. And to me, that would be, that's the kind of work that I've done and will start to look at when it comes to why am I always banging my head against the wall in something? And what am I really afraid of, and what's really driving that? And what I can just share from my experience is that I believe that I needed to be whole first. There's a lot of people that talk about you have a partner that completes you, or they're your better half, and it's this idea that like the two of us together become the whole. And my experience was I believe that I was kind of being built whole and having a real relationship with my creator, and that was what began my ability to actually start having a relationship with one of God's kids. I wasn't, I mean, obviously we all are, if we're single, we're like, yeah, getting laid's great. I don't think anybody in the world is honestly going to be like, oh, that's awful. If you're, I mean, unless you've been severely traumatized in that, department. But I think everybody is going to understand that there's self-interest in all relationships. And I think that's just inherently part of my understanding of my humanness, is there's self-interest in everything I do. Um, there's many phone calls I don't want to answer. Enlightened self-interest. I know that if I'm doing this work and I'm trying to be of service and helping others, that I'm probably going to stay sober. And as a result, staying sober is going to allow me to continue to enjoy this life that has been showing up. There's self-interest in all of it. But when it comes down to how do I connect with people, if my motives are I need you to fix me, I think I'm gonna possibly I'm gonna find myself in a bunch of funny places, because I'm gonna change and bend who I think who I am and my principles in order to get you to like me, because I think that you might fix me. And I think what that ultimately is a demonstration of is the delusion that somehow someday I'm going to manage well, if only that I'll be able to be satisfied and happy if I can manage well. Hmm. And so, if anything, it looks like potentially it's time to try to strip back more of those self-seeking motives and to really take a look at what are these fears, and are these fears really, is it not true that they're just a byproduct of self-reliance? And maybe what I've got here is just an absence of God. And maybe if, what my grand sponsor used to say was, I have no idea how to help two sick people have a healthy sick relationship, but I can help show you how to have a relationship with God. And if you can develop a healthy relationship with the God of your understanding, chances are that all the other relationships in your life will start to get sorted out. And I believe that that has been my experience, is by just trying to live and work this program to the best of my ability to see when I've got fears, to look at them, when I've got resentments, look at them, when I've got relationships going sideways, look at them, and look for where selfishness and self-centeredness and self-obsession is showing up. And then realize my primary purpose here is to get closer to God and to be a demonstration of God's power, God's love, and God's way of life, and go help others and make that the focus. That's been my primary purpose now for a good bit of years. Is my job today is to go and live this life of love and service and try to help some other drunks. And that seemingly has sorted out all the other stuff, where now I actually am finding myself in right relations with all kinds of people, that super talented, creative people. And, I have this marriage and all this other shit that was just impossible. Like, I didn't see women as people when I showed up in AA. I had a laundry list of inventory that got written that looked like, I don't care about your well-being. I don't have any regard for your health. And I really just don't care what happens to you, but I'm willing to use you to get what I want, which was physical intimacy, validation, applause, whatever that stuff was. And I had this thing where I was willing to use any lady that showed me any kind of kindness for my own selfish ends. And the reality is, I'm not okay with that. But I wasn't able to change that. That was the best I could do, and that was how I lived for a good chunk of years. And so from that to where I'm at today, I think is a pretty big change. And really all that I've done is just tried to keep my eye on the ball. And I think that's what this primary purpose is all about. We just got to keep our eye on the ball here. And every relationship I'm in, and every group activity, what's my primary purpose at work? What's my primary purpose in my marriage? What's my primary purpose in my family? And as a group, you can get together and hash that out. If you're on a business and a work call and you have a new team, you're probably going to get together and hash out what is the purpose of this committee that I'm on, or this group, or what's the purpose of this team? What's our mission? And as long as we kind of understand what that is, and we make sure we're focused on that, I think we can end up finding ourselves in right relations with a lot of each other. I feel like that's about it on this, unless there's any more questions or anything that y'all want to say. I feel like, this has got a lot of personal application. And the main takeaway I have is, like, it's better to be really clear about what it is we're doing than try to do everything. And as long as I have a group conscience and I sort out what is it that I'm actually trying to do here, that we seem to be able to keep ourselves going in the right direction. And that's really the goal here, is to stay going in the right direction. In AA, to make sure that AA exists. And then in all other areas of my life, to make sure we don't get super spun out, and to know where I'm at, and try to do what I need to do where I'm there. So, but does anybody else have anything?
Nope. I think we can continue with the next edition next week, I guess.
Beautiful. I'll stop the recording.